Hello everyone, welcome back to the Connected Classroom. My name is Rusty May. I am a school counselor by trade and have been doing online education for the last 17 years. When the pandemic struck, I joined in with Learning Revolution to put some shows together to talk to teachers specifically about how to create effective relationships with their students, both online and in person as we go through this challenging situation. So today we're going to be talking about opening up your school safely. I see you've got a lot of people here today. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello to everyone who's watching the recording as well as the podcast and listening online. So thank you for being here today. I'm going to open up your mics individually and please say hello if you'd like to. Tell me who you are and where you're at. Let's see who we got here. Teddy, you there?
I'm here, Rusty. Good morning and good
How are you?
afternoon. Good day to everyone. I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing good. What's going on in New York?
Everything is going great. We're in the process of still trying to reopen. As of last night, one of the universities here decided to go remotely. So I'm a bit concerned as to why, but I get because of the pandemic. But I guess my question to the school is, did they not have enough testing? Did they not trust the students and hold at the end of the bargain? But as for my school where I work at SUNY Geneseo in upstate New York, we're still in the process of getting ready to reopen as of August 31st. So
Well, we've seen a lot of stuff. I know Notre Dame shut down. I know North Carolina shut down.
Michigan State did as of yesterday.
Yeah, so it's really difficult, as you've talked about on the show before, to make 20-year-olds kind of realize the fact that they are vulnerable at some level and keep them following the guidelines. So that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it's starting to become difficult now as schools are starting to realize that, you only can control the students on campus. Once everybody departs and moves back to their houses or apartments, it's pretty much a free for all in terms of what they can do. And given the freedom that they have, it's going to be really difficult to tell a 19 to 23-year-old to stay at home and not socialize for a whole semester.
Yep, it's going to be a tough one. Thanks for being with us. I hope you'll join in as we talk during the show.
Thanks.
Katie, is it Katie or maybe it's Katya? Katya, are you there?
Yes, it's Katya.
Katya, how are you? Where are you coming, visiting us from?
I'm in Niterói, which is a city 10 minutes away from Rio in Brazil.
Okay, so you're in Brazil. What's going on down there?
Yeah. Well, a lot of COVID and a lot of political crisis as well, and economic crisis. It's a bit of a disaster, chaos, in fact, but we get by.
Are you teaching in a school?
Yeah, I'm, in fact, I coordinate a course which has recently gone online because of the pandemic. And it's a university course. It's a project at the university. So in fact, I help teachers teach online.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I mentioned to you in the chat that I live in Portugal, so I'm working on my Portuguese at this point.
Good.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Barbara Anderson. Barbara, do you like to introduce yourself? There you are.
Hi. I work in Rio, Brazil. We're still teaching remotely, but anytime we can go back to school. So I'm really interested in hearing more about what's happening in other schools.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about today some of the safety tips that people have been talking about that are going to make it work. I think one of the challenges is going to be everywhere, the United States, Rio, wherever you happen to be, is going to be the economic reality of what these changes and the things that we'd have to do to make it safe. The economic reality, that's going to be very difficult. So we'll talk more about that as we go forward, and I hope you'll join in with us. Thank you.
I'll stay as long as I can. I'm very interested. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Shannon, are you with us? Would you like to introduce yourself? right, can't get Shannon on there. Mirella. Mirella? Did I get that even close to right? Mirella? Are you there? Okay. How about Harding, P. Harding? Are you with us today? You want to introduce yourself?
I am. I'm Paulette Harding, and I'm from Streamwood, Illinois. That's outside of Chicago. And this week and next week, students are heading back. So I work at a public library, so I'm wanting tips to make sure everybody stays safe.
Okay.
Starting remotely here, so.
All right, but they are coming back, you said?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Well, thanks for being with us today. Tracy, are you with us? You want to introduce yourself, Tracy? How about Chris? Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everybody. I'm in Maryland, in central Maryland, particularly Anne Arundel County. And as far as local public schools here, they are starting in a couple weeks, distance learning only. I'm not a public school teacher. I actually teach in a correctional facility in central Maryland, in the central Maryland region. And I just got off actually our department discussion of the reopening plan as it is now. We are actually planning on in-person instruction starting after Labor Day. So that would be phased in over time after we do our initial testing and data entry for the new fiscal year, which started in July. So we're actually a little behind schedule as far as that's concerned, but we're working on getting everybody in so we can do the testing and begin instruction hopefully sometime reasonable time, within a month or so, I guess.
Just within the correctional institutions or within the entire school system?
No, the correctional education is a separate department of Maryland state government. So as far as our operation in Maryland, we are phasing in throughout the Maryland correctional facilities, jails and prisons, in-person instruction where we can. Most of the institutions, certainly the one I work at, I'll just speak for mine, we do not have the capability of doing distance learning. We have to phase in-person instruction following all COVID-19 protocols. So that's what we're in the middle of planning out now, is how we get back in the facility, how we set up our actual environment and procedures, and then begin initial testing, academic testing for students, and phase in actual instruction after that. It's a process. It's a long, involved process. We're working on it.
All right, I appreciate it. I went to University of Maryland, missed that area, so it's nice to have you here. And Andrea Garcia, are you with us? You want to say hi?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I have my headphones on. I'm in Los Angeles. I work at the public library for the city, and I work at 2 school libraries. We just started yesterday, but we're doing it remotely. And everything is changing day by day. But last night at my son's school, through the Zoom, he's a senior at the nearby high school, the principal said that we'll most likely be doing remote up until December at least.
Okay, that's quite a challenge, but it'll be something that we're all going to figure it out as we go forward.
Exactly. Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And I see from Shannon, she's from a small town from Albany, I'm thinking New York, director of a rural library, looking for some tips and information about staying safe. And we also had Mirella, who is also a teacher as well, that's joining us today. So what I wanted to talk about today, I've been doing some reading about what it's going to take in order for us to open up. And I'm going to share my screen with you and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's going on. If you have any points or feedback, I'll stop as we go forward because I want this to be interactive. The Connected Classroom is about everyone having a chance to have a conversation, but some of these things are things that we're going to need to think about. Obviously, if you're in higher education, it's going to be a little bit different. These are more things that are geared towards the K-12 environment. But hopefully they'll be of some use to you as we move forward. As we start this, the Connected Classroom was created based on the idea of figuring out ways to support student learning as we go through this process. And what I've heard from the majority of you so far on the podcast has been that you are going to be starting remotely. So there's a lot that we can talk about remote learning. We may move to that at toward the end of this particular broadcast and talk a little bit more about that. How do you connect effectively with students in the virtual environment? Because it sounds like more and more of us are going to be dealing with that. And that's a really, really important thing as we go into a new year, because one of the things that we hear from teachers over and over and over again is the fact that last year they had a long period of time to connect with their students, which made the online learning a little bit easier. But this year, if you've got a brand new class of students, what are some of the things that you can do to connect effectively with those students as you begin to start the new year? And you know, that's K-20, that's K-18, K-20, K-22, whatever you're talking about, figuring out ways to effectively connect with those students. Obviously, we have issues around internet connectivity. We have issues around hardware. We have issues around home environment. Those are all things that, as I've looked at the research over the last 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months, it's important, and those things are really valuable. But what's the key, it seems to be, is that the student, regardless of what age they are or what level they're in education, feels connected to the environment, and that they feel like that the environment is about them and what they're experiencing right now. So the number one thing that we can do, obviously take care of ourselves. That's the most important thing that we can do, but connecting with kids and talking to them really, really honestly about what is going on, what their experience is, how are they feeling. We have a huge upsurge in a majority, in most of the mental health categories, eating disorders, depression, all kinds of things that are happening during this pandemic. And so as educators and as leaders, we, you know, as much as we can to get into our students and to make time, regardless of how we're connecting with them, to find out where they're coming from. If you're working in a library, for example, and students are coming to you for books, or they're coming to you for research information or research material, are we asking questions to find out, or are we just providing them with the resources that they need? Because right now they're feeling very isolated, and I think the ability to connect and the ability to be able to express themselves, even if it's just for a moment, is really important. I'll make the analogy, I've for years gone to the post office because I do a lot of mailing in the United States when I was living there, and I would always notice that generally older individuals who were in the post office would take time to really talk to the person at the counter, and they needed it. It felt like to me that they needed an opportunity just to express themselves, just a chance to say hello, just a chance to kind of talk to someone. In my own mind, I kind of made up stories that a lot of these people might have been, you know, single, or that their partner might not have been that engaged, and that they were looking for some human connection. And our ability to provide that connection and build that connection for our students online is going to be really, really important as we move forward. And I'd like to, I'm going to see if I can share another thing here really quickly. I'm going to stop the share and get you guys into something that I just found today. You might already know about it. It's called Bitmoji. I don't know if you have seen it, but anybody can do it. I did it today online, and I was able to create a little graphic of myself, and I was able to share it with some of the kids that I work with. But Bitmoji is this amazing program that allows you to create, you can do it for games, you can do it for all that stuff, but teachers have fallen in love with it for creating a classroom. You take a picture of yourself, and then you create an image of yourself, and then you're able to create these virtual classrooms. And this doesn't really give me what I'm looking for here, but I would like to try to find some of these things for you guys to look at in terms of the Bitmojis. But some of the classrooms that they've created, I'm going to share this screen with you really quick, that talks a little bit more about the Bitmoji. Let's see, we can get some of these pictures online. Well, we'll do this later, but Bitmoji is something you might want to check out. I'll type that in there. It's bitmoji.com, and you can create an avatar of yourself, and you can create these online classrooms. And for example, in libraries, they have an opportunity where you can create these books. You can click on the book, and the student can get information that they're looking for in a virtual classroom. And it's really a fun way to connect. And so as I'm saying, as I was saying before, it's really important that we find ways to connect with all of our students right now. And that's really the most important thing that we can do as we move forward going through this. The things that we're talking about in terms of understanding the safety plan that is involved in the reopening plan. Obviously for higher education, buses aren't a big part of this, but if you think about transportation, how are students getting to and from the classroom? And for the K-12 environment, the bus is obviously a very, very important way that students are getting back and forth. And so when you're looking at your reopening plan, it's important to look at what they're thinking about transportation. For example, if you're in a college environment and you're thinking about students coming and going, what are those transportation plans? How are they moving students around within buildings, within you know, the environment of the student union? How are they getting people around? Are they creating safe spaces? Are they finding ways to limit the number of people that are going in at one time? For the buses, obviously it's important to understand too, and we talked about this earlier, was the economic reality. They're talking about cutting the bus loads down by 50%. And 50% means that we need twice the number of bus drivers. And if you are aware at all about how difficult it is to get bus drivers, that is next to impossible to do currently. And to be able to get twice the number of bus drivers that we need is going to be a significant issue. And when we get to the end of this presentation, we talk a little bit about money, and that's another really important thing. The next thing that needs to be in the reopening plan, and that we want to make sure as we look at what our district or our university or our college is doing, are really clear policies around kids or teachers who are sick. If we have staff or students that have any symptoms whatsoever, they need to stay home. Now, obviously, we're going to have students, we're going to have teachers who, for whatever reason, or parents for whatever reason, who feel like, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's got 100, the temperature's 100. It's not that big of a deal. I wouldn't normally take them to the hospital. What are our school or our institution's policies around the idea of sick students, and how do we police that? Like, how do we get to the point where we understand how to manage that load? I mean, there's a lot of schools that are thinking about taking temperatures as students come in the front door. Are we going to then be aware of every, especially in the elementary grades where we see a lot of those kind of, my stomach doesn't feel good, or I'm not, and a lot of kids do that because they have anxiety. How are we going to manage that? And that's really important. Also, the idea of the asymptomatic cases, which at the higher grade levels is even more of a reality. If you think about it from the perspective of the college age kids, we're seeing more and more of the asymptomatic cases. And I'm wondering about that, and I'm going to ask Teddy to join us real quick. Teddy, are you thinking at all about the asymptomatic cases and how they're going to deal with some of that part of it? Because I know you're interested in testing, but are you talking about the full-on test, or what were you thinking?
Well, I'm more concerned about testing in terms of how frequently it gets done. If you look at what happened recently with Notre Dame, UNC, Michigan State, a lot of these schools closed because they just couldn't keep up with testing students. Along with the fact that you had a cluster of COVID cases, my other concern outside of testing is more of what happens during flu season. You had mentioned all these symptoms, but come October, if I'm sneezing or coughing or happen to have a sore throat, I'm going to think of maybe possibly having COVID rather than think, oh, maybe it's just the flu. I can take Robitussin, I can take Tylenol and be fine. That's my other concern. On top of the testing is how frequent are schools going to get tested? We all have to go to lunch. We all have to go home. We all have to go grocery shopping. We all have errands to run outside of our professional life. And just like professional staff, we also have the same thing with students. A student may go from one lecture hall to another one classroom to another, may go from a Dino Hall to another Dino Hall, may go from a library. So that transportation, that means of getting around, how do you track that if you test them, yes, say when they come back to campus, is the next test going to happen the next day, midweek, the weekend? That's my other concern as well. We're all are trying to be optimistic about opening, but in reality is the testing alone is being delayed. There isn't enough testing to go around. And if we're not tested frequently, the possibility of us catching COVID and not detecting it can cause a huge concern amongst parents, staff, and faculty.
Right. Chris, if you don't mind, I was going to bring you back in. I wonder about that in the correctional institutions. Are you guys seeing upticks in cases? If I can get you unmuted, if you're still there. Are you there, Chris?
Yes, hi, thank you. I can't really speak to an uptick in cases. What the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services in Maryland is able to do is on a weekly basis, they put out sort of a media announcement on the distribution of cases throughout the facilities in Maryland. And it doesn't seem to be what I would consider an uptick, but that is only in terms of, you know, the availability of testing and the frequency of testing. I believe all of the inmates are tested at least once a month. And I do know that all staff, as we report, are going to be required to have a test before we enter, and then monthly testing thereafter. I don't believe that there is a significant outbreak in any of the facilities in Maryland. I've not heard of that.
Is that the quick test? Is that the relatively quick one, or is that the one that takes a while to get back?
These are the nasal swabs, and we've been told that we should be able to get the results back from the State Health Department, University of Maryland medical system is saying they're going to be able to provide results back within 5 days. So we're able to schedule our test. Myself as a staff member, I'm going to be tested at the end of the month on the 31st, and we are to have our results back to us within 3 to 5 days of entering the building on September 8th.
Are you allowed to go in the building before you get your results back?
I really hope not, and the idea is no. No, we're not
Okay.
going to be. And if any of us happen to test positive, we would be put on sick leave, paid sick leave, for I believe 10 days, 10 work days.
We've been talking about that in the education system, how difficult it is to find substitutes. What's it like in the correctional system trying to find people to replace you if you're on sick leave? Is that doable, or is that a difficult thing?
It is not doable. It would simply be a class cancellation. There would
Okay.
be no movement of the students from their housing units to class on those days that I would be out, at least as far as I know. I mean, and again, all this is speculative. We just started discussing our reopening plan formally amongst our staff today. It was given to us earlier in the week, so we haven't had a lot of time to actually even discuss it, let alone figure out the implementation of it. But like I said earlier, we're really focused on actually getting our beginning of the fiscal year testing and registration of our students done first. You have to fill out the federal paperwork and all sorts of stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Katya, can I bring you in? What is the testing situation like in Brazil? Is there any testing that's going on? Are you there, Katya? I can't get Katya to come back in. Who else was, we had someone else from Brazil as well, but all right. I was just wondering if you want to send me a chat, that would be great. I was wondering what was going on in Brazil as regard to the testing as well. So I'm going to share the screen again. We'll talk a little bit more about that, the issue of clear policies around sick, and what Teddy brought up too is a very interesting thing is as we hit the flu season, how are we going to differentiate between the common cold, I guess common flu, which obviously has its own issues, but then how do we know if it's COVID or if it's just the flu? And those are going to be some things that we have to look at as we go forward and in thinking about this. And we did get a chat here, see who came in. Who else? Barbara is from Brazil. Let me check with Barbara real quick. I'm going to stop the share and see if Barbara can check in. Barbara, are we doing any testing? Is there anything like that testing going on in Brazil? I can get you unmuted.
Not in Brazil as a whole that I know of, but in the school where I work at, the few people who went to school, first of all, they take our temperature before we go into the building. Only essential workers are being allowed to go into the building. I'm a librarian, so I went in to check in all the books that were dropped off. And they did test me. They did that. It's a blood test and you get the results half an hour later. And people who got, I was tested negative. I haven't come into contact with COVID yet. The people who have, they have been sent home on leave, paid sick leave. But that's our school. It's a private school, so.
Do you have to pay? Do you have to pay for the test results? Or do you have to pay for the test?
Not me, the school paid.
Okay. Yeah, that's another big issue that we're having in other schools too, is who's going to pay for the test. Teddy's mentioned that before, is that, I mean, that blood test that you can get back in a half an hour sounds like a wonderful thing, but I would imagine it's relatively pricey, so that's probably going to be difficult for a lot of schools to pull off.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Barbara. So back to what we were talking about in terms of the clear policies around this. The next thing we want to think about too is the consistency and the mandatory mask usage for kids and adults. And I want to underline here the adult thing. And this was something that I was reading the other day, and it's something that I've noticed in schools over the past 20 years since I've been working in education, is the difference between what we say and what we do. And I think as a parent, I realize that more and more every day, that oftentimes I don't do what I say. But it's really, really important that we think about the consistency of the mandatory mask policy and whether or not the adults in the environment, the adults being the educators or at the university level, the employees, are all wearing the mask. Because if kids are walking into the library and someone has a mask down around their neck, or if someone's walking into a building and the person in the building has a mask around their ear, or they have it around their arm, then there's going to be the message to everyone that this is not a consistent mandatory policy. And in areas like the United States and like Brazil, not so much in Europe where I am, although we have had protests recently in Germany and in the UK about mask usage. But I know in the United States, and I know in Brazil in particular, there are serious groups of the population who feel like that this policy is unfair. And I completely understand their perspective. I completely understand where they're coming from, and I completely understand the right to feel that way. But what are we as educators going to do when we're bringing in a group of people, not only a group of people into our environment, because stores can make the decision, right? So if I'm a store in Brazil or a store in the United States or Germany or the UK, I'm a supermarket, I can say unequivocally that you have to wear a mask in order to come into my store. That is not something that you can argue with me about, because I am a business and therefore I can say that I get to do this. Now the question then becomes, if these are public institutions, they're public buildings, are we going to require masks? Are we going to require that of everyone in that environment? And I think it's a really interesting conversation. And I'd like to go back to Chris, if you don't mind me going back too. Is there something, are you requiring masks within your classroom situation in the correctional institutions?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the rules have already been in place before, for all inmates that have any movement throughout the compounds and through the buildings. But yes, as far as the schools are concerned, in the library, students all are required to wear masks. Staff are going to be required to not only wear masks, but face shields, goggles, gloves.
Okay.
There's going to be a significant amount of PPE available provided to us by the state through our institution. And we have been ensured by our leadership that all these protocols are to be followed strictly, and we're to hold students and any staff accountable as such, particularly students that feel they might want to not follow the protocol. We have a discipline policy in place for that.
Well, I mean, obviously, you guys have a total different discipline policy than we do in a public education environment. So you can probably uphold that policy a little easier than we can. But that, I think that's going to be a significant issue when it comes down to enforcing that is students who just feel like they don't want to do it. And outside of the correctional institutions, the range of discipline measures that we have available to us is very limited.
Yes.
Sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you there? Go ahead.
No, I appreciate you just mentioning that, because even locally here, there's no uniformity into how the public appears to follow these mask guidelines, which for Maryland were fairly strict, early on and still are. But as a staff, as a teaching staff, we have to look out for each other too, and help each other understand the importance of this. And I believe we're in agreement on that. I don't think there's any illusion that we can be safe without fully protecting ourselves with all available equipment. So we plan on doing that.
And we got to lead by example. So thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, Teddy, are there mask policies at your university at this point?
Yeah, they already have signs on each building indicating that masks are required upon entrance in every building on campus.
Okay. Hey, I'm bringing some people in that I know are going to share with me. If you'd like to share, please raise your hand or do something. The mic is open. I would love to hear from you. This is an interactive show. Roberta, welcome. Thank you so much. You want to jump in real quick and introduce yourself? We usually do that at the beginning of the show. Are you there, Roberta?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
My name is Roberta Walker Kilkenny. I live in Western Massachusetts, but I teach at Hunter College in New York City. I've actually been teaching fully online for about 8 years.
Okay.
On my campus for the fall, most of the classes will be remote. The exceptions are the lab classes and the studio classes as of this moment. And there also will be certain offices that are open. I'm not sure what the policy is. The concern of the union is not, that I've heard expressed, is not so much mask oriented as ventilation, disinfecting, that kind of thing. Where I am in Western Massachusetts, the K through 12 situation in the schools, it differs greatly from district to district in terms of whether or not it's a mandatory mask policy. For the most part, I think it's supposed to be mandatory unless the student has some health or other issue. But the teachers have been expressing concern because while they recognize that there are some students that do have health and other challenges, it still calls into question what then is the risk to others in the room if that student is not wearing a mask. And that has not been resolved.
So from the college perspective too, because we've been talking about this with some higher education individuals that have been with us on the show, are you going to see, because you're going all online, are you going to see a financial impact to your institution because of that all online policy? What's going to happen in terms of charging students? Because I know at the University of Maryland, for example, Chris might be aware of this, at the University of Maryland, they have in the middle of the campus a series of housing buildings that are actually owned by a private company. And that private company has already come out and said that those students are required to pay their housing for the upcoming semester or the upcoming year because they signed a contract, regardless of whether or not we're in class or we're not in class. So, because obviously the financial aspect of the kids not doing that, are you aware at all of the financial impact, Roberta, at your institution?
There is, but Hunter's part of the City University of New York. So the budget comes largely from the city and also the state. It's not covered by tuition, although there are tuition charges. The tuition doesn't cover the full expense. So we've had our budget slashed at the city and the state level, which has nothing to do one way or the other with what's happening with the students. Hunter itself is in the middle of Manhattan. There is a dormitory, From what I understand, the dormitory will be opened because we have students who are from out of state. We have students who are international students. And I think there's concern about also students who may be in unhealthy environments in their private situation. The dormitory was open for a while in the spring and then was closed to Hunter students because it was used for other purposes by Governor Cuomo. So I'm not sure, you know, what's going to happen with that. But my suspicion is that while there are dormitory fees, that in the grand scheme of things within CUNY, the dormitory fees don't add up to very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're also talking about the financial impact of this, and we're looking at some of the options that are going forward. Some positives that have come out this week is a push right now for a national, it's kind of like, what do you call that? The Peace Corps. Remember everyone remembers the Peace Corps, but they're talking about doing a tutor corps. So it would be a national organization of 20 to 24-year-olds who are educated, who don't have you know, situations where they're able to get jobs right now, and they're talking about trying to create a tutor corps, and they can have what Roberta was talking about is at least the dorm is a safe place. It has internet access. You know, you have some supervision there. So if kids are in challenging situations, they can go there and they can do their academic work. This tutor corps is apparently going to be set up around similar institutions like the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCAs, and places like that, where young people can come in and facilitate students learning online and provide a place for students to go during the day while their parents have to work. So, you know, again, there's phenomenal things that are happening. I really believe at the end of the day that this is going to revolutionize education for us and really help us to understand what education needs to look like in the next, you know, 100 years, because we haven't thought about it probably for 120 years since the last time we changed education at the beginning of the 20th century or 19th century or 20th century. But, you know, there's some exciting stuff going on. So thank you. Guadalupe, you just joined us. Would you like to introduce yourself? We like to talk to people on the show. If you're there, you would like to say hello. Guadalupe? Hello? See if I can unmute you.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Where are you visiting us from?
Very fine. From Puebla, Mexico.
Okay. How are things in Mexico?
It's a little busy for those activities to the new school year.
Are you a teacher?
Yes.
What grade or what level?
K-12, high school.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay. So we're going to share the screen again. We'll talk a little bit more about the mask policies that we just talked about before, the consistent mandatory mask usage. I know Teddy has talked about his union. If you're working at a college, obviously you've got a union. If you're working in any educational environment, at least in the United States, we have unions to be able to really look at these things and talk about them. But I think, and especially in a number of states in the United States where we have, in different areas, Brazil being a similar situation where we have parents who are very, very adamant that it's not okay to require me to wear a mask. It's my, and I've heard this, it's my God-given right to not wear a mask. And so there's people who are bringing all kinds of things to the table. And if they're thinking that way, how are we going to be able to manage that in the classroom? And we talked with Chris about the discipline policies and so forth within the correctional institutions. But in public education, it's very, 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 very difficult for us to do anything of any substance. And now when we're dealing with all the other issues that are on the table in terms of trying to understand restorative justice and some of the other things associated with some of the problems that we have with inadequate discipline or obviously unequal discipline within the racial communities, and talking about dealing with these kinds of things, how are we going to deal with that? And these are questions that we need to be asking. We need to be asking the people that are in charge, and we need to find out what's going on too. And so Roberta was talking about, she's recruiting retired teachers for voluntary homework help. It doesn't solve the child care issue, but it addresses some of the challenges that parents have. I agree 100%. And I think the biggest challenge that we have right now in public education, and especially in cities like where you are, New York City, down in LA as well, is the fact that the parents who have to go to work, who cannot work online, the biggest challenge that we have right now is finding ways to support those parents. And in other countries, that's doable because there are situations where some healthcare providing is something that's that provide, but in a lot of countries that's not the case. The next thing we want to think about is the 6 feet between desks and smaller class sizes. Obviously, a number of states right now, everything that I'm reading, one of the things that's happening is that we're taking a lot of old schools out of mothballs. And so there's a number of states that are thinking about bringing old buildings online and trying to figure out ways to spread people out. Again, the problem is when you start talking about spreading out and you're doubling the number of classes that need to be managed, where are the people going to come from? And that's the question when we start thinking about this. And at the end of this presentation, where is the money going to come from? I know right now that that in the United States, at least, we've got the Congress coming back to discuss the Postal Service. They're also discussing whether or not there's going to be a second kind of a bailout and where the money is going to come from. But that's going to be a really important thing, because all of these issues are fantastic when we think about cleaning the high touch areas. I think someone mentioned that, focused on those kinds of things, and we can put up the hand sanitizers, we can clean the high surface areas, we can do that kind of stuff, but where is the money going to come from to pay the people to do that? Are we going to refocus our attention away from the basic maintenance of the classroom, so thinking less about sweeping and mopping the floors and having people who are involved in the daily maintenance of our schools or institutions working more towards on those kinds of surfaces and thinking more about how those surfaces can affect and can spread? Are we thinking about that kind of stuff? What are our leaders telling us in regards to how the maintenance crew is going to address these issues? Because these are going to affect us. Obviously, the floors are important, but how important is it? If it's on your shoe and it's being taken out of the building and so forth, it's less important than if it gets on your hands and then it gets into your face. So looking at this in the reopening plan, finding out how they're dealing with these kinds of things, and also being a proponent and an advocate for yourself and for your staff and for your team about these issues that are really most important for us. Someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Roberta, talking about ventilation. A number of institutions that are fortunate, that have money and are able to do it, have gone ahead and taken the route of the airlines and brought in these highly effective ventilation systems. These systems are able to clear the air. They're able to clean the air on a pretty regular basis. Here in Portugal, we have a company that has already gotten a patent on it's a UVA, kind of a high, it's using basically UV radiation within a room. It can kill 90% of the germs within 1 minute, and it can kill 100% of the germs within 5 minutes. And that's the kind of thing that will provide UV radiation within the room. I think they're still doing testing on whether or not that's something that would affect the participants in the room. Obviously, that's important. But the ability to clean the room on a regular basis without thinking about anything else, highly ventilating the room. Are there windows? Are there doors? Are there hallways? Opening things up. There's a problem here, especially in the lower education environment and also in the university environment. Over the last few years, we've seen such a rise in the number of people coming onto campuses with malintentions and doing things that to hurt other students and so forth. So when we think about ventilation and opening up these rooms, do we then open ourselves up to security issues? In places like New York City and Los Angeles, where we tend to lock our schools to protect ourselves and to protect our students, those issues are going to come head to head with each other as we start to move forward in the next week or two, because all of this is coming up, because Labor Day is only 2 weeks away. And so all these issues are going to come up. Where are kids going to eat? That's a big deal, whether you're in the university system or you're in the K-12 environment. What's going to happen in the cafeteria environment? Where are kids going to eat? And I'm going to stop the share for a minute and ask a couple of our higher education folks to talk a little bit about that part. Teddy, what's going to happen with the, basically if the kids are coming back onto campus in terms of the where they're going to eat in the university food centers?
Well, for the Dino Halls, they already have plexiglass in place. They already have, I guess, takeout or takeout orders where folks are just, I guess, grab and go per se to just, place an order, have their food ready and just take it and leave it. But in terms of what happens if a student, let's say, goes to a restaurant, comes back to campus, that's still something that hasn't been discussed yet. And that all brings me back to my previous issue is, we all have other things that we do outside of either teaching or going to classes. So testing has to be essential here, along with contact tracing. If a student decides to eat at a restaurant during a break between their second and third class, or decides to go to Walmart and, God forbid, doesn't wear their mask or comes in contact with somebody, this is the thing we need to really look in seriously and really focus on.
Okay. Thanks, Teddy. Anybody else that wants to jump in, please send me a note or raise your hand in there as well. So figuring out how we're going to feed people, obviously in the K-12 environment, it's a little bit different. Teddy mentioned the fact that you can get a takeout at a cafeteria at a university, which is fantastic. Take it back to your dorm room and you can eat in the safety of your own room. But, thinking about that in the K-12 environment, from my perspective, that's kind of my bailiwick. That's a really big deal, is thinking about how we're going to feed kids. And then also the reality that if you're in class and you're doing that, then the teacher has absolutely no break time. So we're putting more and more emphasis or more and more pressure on the teachers to do these kinds of things. And that includes recess as well. So if we're going to do this, how are we going to get kids outside? How are we going to do these kinds of things from the college or the university environment? This is actually how I met my wife. It's called Ultimate Frisbee. But there is a big push right now for outdoor activities and no contact sports, where you're thinking about things like football and basketball and wrestling and a lot of the contact sports. Ultimate Frisbee is a great opportunity. You can see from this picture that even in a defensive posture that you're pretty much distanced. You can wear face protection and so forth. But a lot of universities already have Ultimate Frisbee programs, but we're going to have to figure out ways to get kids out and exercising, and ways for us to do that as well, because this next 6 months is going to be incredibly challenging for all of us. And my hats are off to all of you, because the work that you're doing is heroic. You are the front line right now. I think in the fight against the pandemic right now, educators are the front line. I appreciate the medical industry and everything they did in the first 6 months of the fight, but now it's on us. And as we continue to move forward and figure out how to avoid the educational slide and deal with the challenges that we're here to deal with, this is absolutely paramount. And we need to stand up and we need to let people know. And the most important thing, obviously, right now is talking to everyone about the idea of where the money is going to come from. And it's not so much in terms of pay raises and things like that, although I'm sure that those are all deserved. But the idea right now is if we're going to make this work, we need to have more resources in terms for us to be able to provide the services that obviously we need. And there's no question in my mind, and there's no question that I don't think in anyone's mind that, oh, I wasn't sharing my screen there. I apologize. Let me go back to the last two screens. I always tell people, don't be afraid of the mistakes you make online. So the last two ones that I was talking about, we're talking about outdoor classes, outdoor or staging in the cafeteria, research in small groups, outdoor activities that don't require contact and keep safe distance, and then the idea of a boost in funding. So I apologize for missing those slides, but what we need to be doing right now, I think, as educators, is really realizing how important we are and taking responsibility for the fact that we are frontline. And in the same way that the frontline in the first 6 months and the healthcare workers and so forth were lobbying constantly for more and more protective gear, for more and more space. I think probably the reason that Governor Cuomo took over the dormitory that Roberta was talking about had to do with the fact that they needed it for a care facility. They needed to put patients in there. We need to be speaking to the people in charge. And if they're not telling us what we need to hear, if they're not telling us what we want to hear, it's time for us to be talking about it and to get our voice heard, whether it's through our union leadership or through our principals or through our direct supervisors, letting people know this kind of information. And you guys are obviously going the next level and participating in professional development activities well in advance of the start of the school year. And I would encourage you to be a leader in this regard and to continue to talk to people about what's going on, and continue to join us on the show. Does anybody have any final comments? I'm going to unmute Teddy because he's always there for me. Teddy, you got final comments?
Yes, thank you once again. I definitely enjoyed listening to you and contributing to the conversation. I guess my advice to folks who are listening is to watch the news and see how other schools are handling their situations, whether it be a school, a company, organization. Follow and see what happens or what's happening, similar to what's happened at UNC, at Michigan State. If a school decides to open but suddenly closes, try to ask why and see how that might relate to your own situation. And if you do come back next week, share your thoughts about what has happened since your last discussion here and what you would like to see. And, just try to get something happening that is best for our safety, but also the student safety as well, or those who are
Thanks.
dealing with it.
Thanks, Teddy. We got a message here. Would small group work be acceptable if students are masked? Again, I think we've been doing that in the environment of, supermarkets and places like that. We're still trying to keep social distancing. Small group work, I think, is going to be a bit of a challenge. I would offer that maybe if you have a large table and you have kids on any side of those tables and they're not leaning into it, depending on the age of the kids, is it going to be something that you can do? Can students work closely together? Should the 6 foot be applied at all times? I think if you're in a public situation, that the 6 foot should be applied at all time, at least for the foreseeable future, until we get some other feedback. Roberta, I got your hand up. Thank you very much. Love to hear from you. I'll get you unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I fully endorse your call for demanding more resources, but I wanted to give a special thanks to you and Learning Revolution, because a lot of the weight, I think, is going to be carried by teachers who are going to seek out training and answers to their questions and so forth, which is unfortunately not going to come from their administrators.
Well, I appreciate, go ahead.
Yes, I was just saying, I know through the years, even before COVID-19, Learning Revolution and the associated groups have been providing a great deal of advice and assistance and training, and also a community, a community of teachers and others. And it's really vital at this point. So I wanted to thank you.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you saying that. And that's one of the reasons that I jumped on board, because what I was hearing from teachers was that at the beginning of this and all over the last 6 months, everybody's been offering, oh, here's a free thing, or you can come join us for a free webinar, and then they attack them with, oh, and buy this, and here's our online group, and now join this, and here's a platform for you to meet your kids, and everybody's trying to sell. And Steve in the Learning Revolution has never done that. He's providing an open source for teachers to come together and talk about these issues, and I cannot be more proud to be a part of that. So thank you for mentioning that. That's really important. Let's see, is Chris still here? Chris, you got any final comments? I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, and I'll echo the previous comment that I do appreciate Learning Revolution for giving us this platform for open discussion, and it's to me informative as well as therapeutic. And I can also say that regarding technology upgrades, I know a number of states have committed resources and effort in terms of improving instructional technology in correctional facilities around the country. Maryland is making efforts to do that. My classroom had begun piloting a tablet program a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now. And, there are significant efforts made to push this further in central Maryland. in the Central Maryland institution. So the interruption here due to the COVID outbreak, I think gives us pause to consider how more expeditiously we can push this move towards these other technologies. In-person instruction, I believe, is still vital, but in situations like this where we're facing a public health crisis, we really need to consider fully implementing remote learning in some fashion, at least as a fallback, if not a primary resource.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you being here. I hope you join us again.
Thank you.
Yeah, you think about the flipped classroom idea and being able to do that. Obviously, the connection piece and the relationship piece and all those kinds of things, but how much of this can we flip and put on the other side instead of having, you know, kids working on this stuff and finding ways for them to do it? Obviously, the challenge then again is the environment. The school provides a safe environment. The home environment, as we're beginning to find out more and more. Also, we're on the first line of identifying students who are at risk. And we're realizing more and more of our students are, and as we get through this pandemic and realize as kids come back to school, that more and more kids need us more than we ever thought was possible. And again, thank you so much. Please join us again. We're here every week on Wednesday. You can also join the group at the Connected Classroom on the Learning Revolution website and get more information. But we love having you here. And it was really nice. Barbara, thank you for your wonderful comment, and I appreciate that. I'm glad to know that people are taking some solace in just having a place to communicate. So as I always like to say, the Connected Classroom, the mics are always open. We love to have you come. Please invite your friends, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Connected Classroom. Thanks for everything you do for the kids in your care.